Hello, I'm Bruce Fretz. I'm here to introduce screenwriter Annie Howell and director Rob Meyer. So this is such a lovely movie. What was the origin of it? I assume since you're the writer, it probably started with you.
Sure. Well, this story had been brewing for quite some time. My family has a similar configuration, and I have two sons who are biracial. And a long time ago, this film took a while to make, I sort of started thinking about my eldest son, who's now 13, actually, and just sort of wondering what his life might be like. I'm a New Yorker since 1995, but my husband's an academic, and I knew we would probably leave New York, which we did, but I had already written the screenplay before that, but it took a while to kind of get our ducks aligned, and so I was able to actually live in a small town and kind of continue to work on the screenplay.
And then how did you become involved, Rob?
Yeah, I got involved a couple years ago. I got the script through the producers, Jared Goldman and Jordan Horowitz. Jared and I knew each other through mutual friends who were filmmakers. My friend Craig Johnson did the movie called The Skeleton Twins, which Jared had produced. And yeah, I just loved the script. And I don't get many good scripts sent to me. I'm not a famous director. So to get a good script that I actually really loved and said, oh, this would be an honor to direct. It was just very beautifully written and nuanced. And I knew from reading it was based on a true characters and kind of true feelings, even if it wasn't a true story. So I said, I'm in, this sounds amazing. And I came on board, and then we got Melanie and Nelson on board. And since this is an actor's focused thing, indie films is all about a lot getting those first two actors, the leads on board to kind of green light the financing. And then, yeah, A.V. Kaufman came on and cast the film, and we were able to fill in all of the supporting roles with like incredible New York-based actors. And yeah, it was just a real pleasure to work on.
And what was your collaborative process like? I mean, once you came on board as director, how much did you work together on shaping?
Fair amount. I mean, it was definitely, it's Annie's story, so she was sort of the god of this world, so I wanted to be very respectful of that, but I wanted to make sure I could pull it off tonally, and that there, every line was something I felt like I was setting the actors up to succeed in. So we had a couple years because we had one configuration and that fell through, and it's typical independent film. So we had a few years to work on it. Actually, Annie had like 8 years to work on it, and I had 2 years of the last two. Yeah, I would just sort of send notes, or I would write out kind of ideas and send it to Annie, and then she would kind of write the final draft. So yeah, I co-wrote my first film, and I think anytime you're directing, you want to do kind of a pass on the script to make sure that you feel like it's your own, even though it's Annie's story.
And how did you feel about that, Annie? I mean, it's your story. You're also a director as well. I mean, what's it like kind of
It was fine,
sharing
actually.
your baby?
I've co-written before many times as well, and even though it was more like we had a number of very creative people contributing to the script, and as we tweaked it. So it wasn't like we were, rehauling the whole thing, but yeah, it was a longer process. I've made a couple other films that the writing process was much quicker, and but it allowed it to sort of cook in a different way, I think, and allowed for little tiny details from life and from imagination to play.
Let's talk about the cast, starting with Melanie, who's kind of your alter ego in the film. What did you see in her? What did you like about her to play this role and really, be one of the three main characters in the film?
Melanie, I'm sure you all know Melanie. She's like an American treasure, even though she's Australian. And she, in general, I always gravitate towards actors that never overact, that always draw from a sense, an honest, personal experience. She only really can work from a personal point of view. She's not a craft-driven actress. I mean, she has great craft because she's been doing this a long time, and she did television. But for her, it's all about making it very personal and very honest. And yeah, I also find her very empathetic and sympathetic, which you need. The character is not that sympathetic, no offense, Annie. But, she's sort of tone deaf at times. She's a little blind to her husband and son situation. She could kind of go the wrong way. So to have someone that I find inherently I sympathize with was important. And then she's funny too, and she can pull at your heartstrings. So for me, it was an amazing match.
What about you, Franny? I mean, that had to be a tough role for you to.
Yeah, I mean, it's
envision.
interesting because when you're writing, and I'm sure if you write, people can really understand this, I hope, because I think it's pretty universal. When you're basing a character on someone who's real, and to do that for myself, it was, I mean, I was doing it slightly, but I was also clearly drawing a line. And, where that line is, I feel like it moves at certain points. And, there are some things that map pretty well to my own experiences, but other things that were pretty opposite. Some of the family dynamics, and actually we left New York for 6 years, and it was because of my husband's job. There were all kinds of things that I wanted to invert also, so it wasn't so close to me, and to have other people really be working hard on the script and obviously directing the film was important to me, to give it some distance so it just didn't feel too close. There's a lot of this was written before my son was even 5 years old too, so.
And Nelson is kind of known for more outrageous characters, True Blood, certainly, even Get On Up. What made you think of him for this role that's much more low-key and,
I mean, yeah, he's a real, like, under-the-radar genius. I mean, he's had a really dramatic life. I mean, he's written a play about his life. So he also, I'd say both Melanie and Nelson draw from the personal. And he had a lot of, he's got some anger. You've seen it in Lafayette. Like, that anger, when it comes out, it's real and it's scary. And, the scene where he tears down the wallpaper, and that scene he actually punched a hole in the wall, which was not in the script, and caused some trouble for continuity. So my job was really keeping him contained in a way, and to say, just hold back, make that subtext, try to, he was getting very upset by how this town was treating him, how his wife was treating him. I mean, he just, in a way, he's almost like I wouldn't say it's a method thing, but he really did take it quite personally. And I mean, he's just, if you've seen his work, he's great. So as soon as his name came up, I said he'd be fantastic. I mean, it was that, and it's interesting. I don't get to audition these actors. At this caliber, for an indie film, you make the offer. So to answer your question more logistically, I like to watch interviews of, like, if Nelson's on a talk show, to see because I can only base it on these iconic performances that I've seen. So then I get to sort of audition him by watching what he's like when he's just being himself, and seeing what kind of person he is, and reading about him. So that is a little bit of a scary beat for an indie film director. Both Melanie and Nelson, you can't ask them to audition, and I understand that. So it's finding a way to understand what their core personalities are like, and what their range is like, and whether they're good for these parts. But honestly, we also said, after you talk with Rob, we'll officially offer you the role. So if we don't hit it off, we don't have good chemistry, or if I say, this is a huge mistake, we can all kind of, without losing face, we can say, this might not be a good match. And, the pay is so bad on these things, they wouldn't be that upset anyway. So we were able to make sure that it was all going to work.
And did your husband have approval of casting?
Oh, he kind of just stayed. He just sort of said, "You guys do your thing." Yeah.
They have such great chemistry. I mean, they make such a believable married couple. Did they get to spend much time together before filming, or was it just kind of on the spur?
Acting. No, because indie films, they had a dinner. We all, Nelson, they flew in like days before we started shooting. But as you're all actors, it's an intimate experience acting with another person. It's a lot of trust, and so they were, and the kids, they were all, days of rehearsal is it, and then working on scenes while they're lighting, kind of thing. But it also adds some urgency and excitement to making an indie film.
Let's talk about the kids, starting with Armani Jackson. How did you find him, and what made you think he would be able to handle this pretty major role?
So Avi Kaufman, can everyone hear me? Avi Kaufman has found so many great kids in her career. You all probably know Avi Kaufman. So she she read my first project, which was called A Birder's Guide to Everything, which was all kids, and she has kids. And she saw something in the kids in my script that she kind of saw in her kids. So she took pity on me and said, I'll cast your film. So now I'm set for life because I've got Avi. So Avi, again, we had 4 weeks to find really had to be a biracial kid who had a sensitivity and charisma and could act. And that's, it's hard to find in a short notice. So that was the most nerve-wracking part of the casting process. And he was LA-based, so it was all Skype auditions. So I didn't, to be completely honest, I liked him and I liked his other performances, but that's I was not super comfortable not having met him before we started a film that required him. And he turned out to be, brilliant and totally natural. And also I trusted Avi, and she's been doing this a lot longer than me. She said, this kid can do it. I found our kid. She called me at or texted me at 1 a.m. when she was watching the tapes that had come in. She said, we found him, Ms. Armani. So that gave me confidence. And so, it worked out, but it definitely was, going in, I wouldn't say I was like, oh, he's, because I hadn't met him, and you could only watch what he'd done and talk to him on the internet, but he was brilliant. For me, child actors, the worst thing you can do is be a child actor. Then he wasn't like that. And, he was just an interesting, charismatic, quiet kid who was awkward in the right ways.
Annie, were you on the set during filming much or at all? Or?
My life took this really strange turn because as these guys were making the film, which, had been a long time coming, my family and I were moving back to New York. So, and it actually crossed dates. So I was on the set, but not as much. I know. I'm living the sequel. So, yeah.
And what was it like working with the kids, particularly in the scenes that are somewhat sensitive, in terms of the sexuality? How delicate you have to be in handling that?
Really delicate. I mean, for me, that was the most nerve-wracking scene I directed was the strip tease. I felt really uncomfortable. I'm a really awkward person to begin with, so I was not having. And to start, though, the dance scenes were really fun. And the girl, and actually Nelson's brother is a really amazing dance choreographer. So he worked with the girls, and they were really playing it cool, like, oh, we need more time. We're not dancers. This is going to be awful. And then they just, broke out into that crazy dance that I was just like, oh, my God, I don't know what this is, but I'm putting every second of this dance in the movie. But, yeah, the striptease, from the script, was something I was always nervous about. But we had Una Lawrence is an amazing Tony Award-winning actress. She's in Pete's Dragon. She'll be in a million other things. And actually, yeah, it wasn't. That was less nerve-wracking for her because that was just she's just a kid and it wasn't a big deal. Like the scene in the diner where she had to actually we cut it from the film. She was supposed to touch his leg under the table after she said oh, why? Because he's black, ha ha ha. And then she was supposed to go like that. And she couldn't do that. That was way too intimate and awkward. Where the dancing was just kind of the silly dancing thing. And her mom and her grandma was there, and we had a completely closed set. And I always, it wasn't worth it to me to make her uncomfortable. It never, in my opinion, it's never worth making an actor uncomfortable, putting them through something that's could be traumatizing for the sake of art. I'm not a believer in that. So, but it didn't feel that way at all, and she was covered up, and it was all very tastefully done, but certainly an uncomfortable scene to watch, and something I thought a lot about as a director. There are creeps out there, and do you want to put something out there that could be, sort of creepy, and it's definitely something we talked a lot about.
The whole film is so well cast down to the smallest roles. How did you get people like Janine Garofalo and Christine Taylor to sign on for supporting parts?
Again, I have all the credit to Avi, who had seen Christine audition for another dramatic role and said, oh, it was one of those outside the box things. And again, we didn't audition her in person. We just went out to her. And she was really excited that she loved the script, and she was excited that we were excited about her for that. She's not thought of as a dramatic actress, even though she's an amazing dramatic actress. And so, yeah, she was just psyched and loved the script, and I think, was excited to be a part of it. And Janine, I think also doesn't, you'd be some of these famous actors, don't get to necessarily show their chops in different types of ways. So I think that in writing scripts, I often think like, if you can write a role for someone who's known for one thing but wants to try something else, you might actually get a dramatic actor to do something funny, or vice versa. So those are both sort of those categories. But also once you have Melanie and Nelson and Avi, and I'm a huge draw for. I'm sure you all are here to. A friend of mine is Cary Fukunaga, who's the executive producer, so it probably helped a little that his name was on there. Everyone's Cary to cast him in their next thing. So we did everything we could to kind of lure talent to the film.
One of the things I thought was interesting about the script and the story is that it's not told from one point of view. You really see all three main characters' point of view. Was that something that was important to both of you in terms of telling the story?
Yeah, the script actually began more from Clark's point of view. Was the initial seed of the idea. And then over the process, we realized we really wanted interesting roles to offer to adult actors, and that probably nudged us. But we often talk about how the structure of the screenplay is a little unusual in that it's not really a 3-act structure. It's more a mini ensemble where each person has their line, a little bit more similar to TV actually. And each, and they're not together a lot either. So they're each on their own sort of trajectory. And I haven't seen a whole lot of films like that. I'm sure there's plenty, but it's a little more typical to have a single protagonist, yeah.
How was that as a director to handle the 3 different storylines?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a challenge. It's more challenge in the editing, to be honest, to make sure you've got a film that works when you're splitting. You're kind of splitting up the attention of the audience, and you're splitting the arcs of each character. But on set, it was great, and it's always a pleasure when the characters are really fleshed out, and you've got more. It's not just one protagonist, and everyone else is there at the bidding of their kind of arc. But yeah, I think that the nicest review we've gotten so far described it as like having the richness of a TV miniseries, which it's funny because like 8 years ago that would have been an insult. Like, oh, it's a made-for-TV movie, and now I'm like, yes, it's like, yeah, it's like Netflix or HBO. Like it's something really good. So yeah, that was, I'd say genre-wise is probably, like it is in this sort of togetherness or those kind of great, rich, ensemble shows.
And the tone, how did you manage to maintain it so that it didn't become stereotypical? It could have easily tipped over into like suburbia, they're clueless, but they're not villains, they're multi-layered.
It was, what drew me to the project was that I knew it was going to be a challenge to do that balancing act and to sort of be an equal opportunity teaser. And hopefully we did that. And yeah, it was important that the New Yorkers were being made fun of as kind of having their own blind spots and having their own snobbery and having their own kind of class issues. And for Christine's character to be, unfairly accused of being racist, I think was important to basically say, we all have our faults. We all make assumptions. And if we start the conversation with that, say, no one's perfect, and not you're a racist. No, then you can maybe have a conversation about our country. And that's a theme that really is different since when we made this film pre-Trump. We made this film honestly when it was a lot more police brutality against young African American, boys and young men. So that was that thread felt much more resonant when we were starting this. And now the thread of sort of finger pointing and regionalism feels very present and relevant. So it's an interesting lens to, it's a very American film, I'd say. Like a lot of issues about America come up in this film, which, yeah, depending on who you are and what your perspective is, you can read a lot into the different kind of themes and storylines.
Why did you decide to have them move to Washington? I know it was shot almost entirely in New York.
Entirely in New York.
Why have them move so far away versus just, upstate or?
Well, we needed distance for the truck. That was the first sort of very practical reason. We needed those days. I had lived in Walla Walla, Washington. That's where I went to college, Whitman College, and sort of knew, back in the day, so not recently, but it needed to be an area that didn't have historically high numbers of Black people, and where just access to anything other than whiteness was going to be fairly new. That's really why. That's sort of
And why Rome, Washington? What's the significance of the?
Well, I was living in Athens, Ohio, and so I was like, okay. Although they're very different towns.
Yeah.
Rome
And
is fictional, first of all.
the meaning of the film's title. There's a song called "Little Boxes." I don't think it's on the soundtrack though. It was used in Weeds. I
The
know.
credits.
Oh, it is in the credits, okay.
And I'll say Chris Bowers did the score and did that kind of jazz version of Little Boxes at the end, and he's a genius. And if you're making a short film or get a chance to hire a composer, I'd highly. He's like a 25-year-old piano prodigy, jazz musician. But yeah, we had struggled with the title. There had been about 8 titles for this film, and it was like an ongoing, it became as like a funny thing, and then it became like torture. Like, could we ever come up with a title for this film that we would all like me and Annie and the producers? And yeah, it was the script supervisor came up with it on one of these you know, when you're done with the shoot and you're all in the van and you all just want to like die, and she's like, what about Little Boxes? And I was like, that's actually kind of a good title for this film. It fit for me mainly because of the little boxes. You know, we all put each other, you know, the assumptions we make and check what box kind of describes you. But I love the song, and I love the idea of the conformity and living in a small town and confining. And then there's like the moving boxes, and I don't know, it's sort of a small, I hate it when people describe it as a small film, but it is kind of a small film. So it's an intimate domestic portrait of some pretty big issues. So it just kind of felt right, and we finally all agreed on it. So we said, done. We're just calling it Little Box. I mean, it was also the Weeds theme music, right. So we were like, do we want to be the Weeds theme music movie? And then we just decided we were overthinking it and went with it.
And the music in the film is so wonderful. I mean, how much of that was in place before you shot or while you were shooting? How much of it did you kind of layer in later?
I mean, a lot of it was inspired by Annie's husband and his very, very extensive playlist that he sent me, all of which I'd never heard before. And then Butch Morris was sort of our guiding music figure. And you heard him right at the end of the credits that you guys were listening to. It was like a combination of jazz and classical and doing compositions of improvisational pieces. And yeah, he just sort of came up in the research and just seemed like a great example of someone you couldn't put into a category, something that wasn't, that maybe people didn't know about, but it kind of had a lot of emotion to it and had a lot of themes that were relevant. So that was kind of, when I went to Chris, I said, we want this basically to be Butch Morris, if we were to compose kind of Butch Morris soundtrack, and then also pull in stuff from Mack's iPhone in terms of what he'd be listening to. And that's basically how the soundtrack came to be. And I definitely would say it's a risk, and if you didn't love it, I understand, but it was one of those choices that we decided we didn't want it to sound like every other indie film either, and make it just a blunk, 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 nice like Little Miss Sunshine soundtrack. We wanted it to really feel kind of different and kind of relevant to the themes and the characters.
And once you finished the film, I know it showed at Tribeca last year, what was the path then to distribution? I mean, you're coming out now this weekend, I think, right?
Coming out on Friday. So please, thank you. Yes, you all don't have to come out again, but
please tell your friends.
It would be so amazing if you all could like do the stuff, like rate it on IMDb or write a nice review on iTunes or something if you like the film, because it was bought by Netflix. This has a business angle to it, right, this panel? So
yeah, sure.
Netflix has really changed the whole, I think there was an article today, it's changed completely the whole independent film scene. Because now you can sell to Netflix for real money, which they did. They paid, I thought, a great price. They paid real money for the film. I mean, I've made another film. A lot of independent films get sold for very little money, and you're really sweating bullets because these investors really believe in your film. You hope that they can make their money back. So Netflix has made it so investors can make their money back on these level films, and it's really opened up a new renaissance of indie filmmaking, and they should get a lot of credit, and Amazon. But it does mean that it's just on Netflix streaming. I mean, they want to make their subscribers happy by giving them good content, and they love the content, they love the film, they love the themes. But it meant there wasn't going to be a theatrical release, and of course, we're film people, so we really wanted a theatrical. So we got a Film Buff, which became Gunpowder and Sky, are doing the theatrical release. I don't know if you guys know this, but mainly theatrical releases just lose money. It's just like a publicity thing, unless you're a huge standout film. So they're trying to put as little money into this theatrical release as possible, which I understand. Which means we need you all to. They're not spending millions of dollars publicizing the film. Is the short of it. So if you could tweet about it and rate it and tell your friends, Andy and I and Carrie and Christine and Armani, we're all doing Q&As after the screenings in the East Village. And going out for drinks after, and it'll be great networking for other. Carrie will be there, and he will cast all of you in
Carrie is our
whatever.
big draw. Yeah, I'm just gonna take him.
This is going on the internet, right? Yes. But yeah, do spread the word. But you know, that's why it's a bit of a Faustian thing, because yes, it's a great from an economic standpoint. From a filmmaker, you want to get the film out there and reviewed into different cities, and it's on Netflix, and so it'll be there for people, but it's a more personal one-on-one experience. It's not like getting thousands of people to go out to the theater. So that's the trade-off. But we couldn't be more thrilled because it's going to be worldwide. I mean, there should be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who get this if they liked Melanie Lynskey or Nelson or this genre, and it'll come up straight up on Netflix. And that's the best way to get films out, for better or for worse. And I think it's getting films greenlit now because this model is a model. 5 years ago, this was not a model. So I think it's overall a really good thing for film.
And moving backwards a bit, how did you get the financing in the first place? I mean, was that Carrie too, or?
No, it wasn't Carrie. The financing was in place before I came on, and it was typical independent film financing. It was financiers who believed in the script and Annie and wanted to make a film. And a lot of the financing came from actually Newburgh, New York, which is where we shot a lot of the film. And they have, and it was in part an effort to get film shot in Newburgh. So we shot on their sound studios, which are amazing, brand new sound studios. It's right across from Beacon. So I would definitely recommend anyone making a film. There's a lot of good reasons to go shoot up in Newburgh. A lot of great locations. And yeah, so that was like with most indie films. You just got to find people who believe in the project and have also some reason to want to get into making films. And yeah, that's what we found.
And what's next for you guys? I know you directed Claire in Motion with Betsy Brandt, which has come out now. What are you on to? Are you going to continue to work together, or are you?
Yeah,
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I have several things cooking all at once. I made a film with Lisa Robinson called Claire in Motion, and right now I'm just writing, so I'm just glued to my computer. I also teach, so.
Yeah, I'm going back to writing another feature. I have a pilot, and then I do branded content is like the way I make money. I have a series with Anthony Bourdain, sponsored by Balvenie Scotch, where we go around the country and the world celebrating craftsmanship, which is a great gig. So that's on YouTube now, and you can watch all of the raw craft with Anthony Bourdain's.
And the last question, we have one question from the audience, from Tatum Garnett, for both or either of you. What was the most surprising challenge you faced working on this film? Surprising. Or just most challenging thing about making it?
I mean, it's, you guys have probably been on indie films. It's like impossible. And so 21 days, but with kids, it's short days. This was my first union film, and I don't want to say I'm pro-union, but when you have no money and it's a union film and you have kids and there's tons of rules, that was new for me. And it was something we kind of all like met at the end with the ADs. I was like, they should have a little like crash course for indie directors so they know what the game is. I'm happy to play by the rules, but I didn't know all the rules, so it was that was challenging. It was a steep learning curve. But just the challenge of like finding the space to have real human moments on a set where it felt like every day, we're not going to make it. And I was definitely made aware of that. Rob, you know what time it is, and we've only, so to try, and that's just filmmaking. But I'd say that was the main challenge, is time and money, and trying to carve out space so that it didn't feel like we were in crisis mode all the time, which we sort of were.
And what about for you, Annie? What was the most challenging thing about telling this personal story?
I've co-directed 2 other features, which my co-director and I really found the financing and sort of managed the production down. So it was ultra low budget SAG productions, so even smaller than this. And we were able to kind of just build those brick by brick. And with this film, it was a little bigger, and although not huge by any stretch of the imagination, but it was sort of notoriously long process of waiting for the financing to align with cast, to align with all the pieces that need to come together. So there was one moment when the producers started saying, this project is cursed. And I remember being like, oh my God, if it just goes away after all these years, I'm just gonna, shrivel up. So, I mean, I'm so pleased that it finally happened and that it happened in the way that it did. I think for me, it was a slow burn challenge on some of those dark days where we really couldn't get it to align. So.
It's always like a double-edged sword. It's like, is it cursed or is it like blessed? Like it's like, like projects that won't die. Like there's probably a reason. Like people like the script. People still believed in it. And yet, so it's like almost like a zombie, like a good zombie.
It's a good way to look at it.
It
Yeah,
won't die.
It's a good. No, a lot of people did not give up, so I'm very grateful for that.
And so are we, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, guys.
Annie Howell, Rob Meyer.